In part one, we talked about the setting and the organization. In part two, about status, ego, dance, crushes, and sleep. And today comes the part that personally means the most to me. The moments you can't buy, that don't fit into photos, that don't show up in a recap, but that stay with you. Welcome to Bachata Cafe, a podcast about dance, intimacy, and psychology. This is part 3 and the conclusion of the special episode about the Afro Latin Festival in Albania. Let's start with Melvin for the first time. I have to talk about Melvin. I used to think of him as someone who takes himself very seriously, who is arrogant and doesn't care about others. And at this festival, I was lucky enough to experience him differently, and I was able to change my prejudices. This guy lives in his own world. He often walks around alone, tapping along to the beat with his finger, his elbow, the corners of his mouth, his head, any body part, even his ears. I have no idea, if you really watch him. And it's as if his whole body is constantly processing music, no matter what kind of music, not just chata music, hip hop, whatever. And he was always somewhere else, so deeply absorbed in the music, and communicating feelings seems to be difficult for him. But when he dances or talks about bachata, that's when he's fully present. And I honestly wonder, and this isn't an attack, but rather a sincere observation, whether he might have autism or ADHD, because he has this almost superhuman ability to live and hear music with his whole body and to reproduce it so accurately. It's well known that people with autism are often exceptionally gifted in certain areas. And with Melvin, I feel like when he hears the music, he's in another dimension. And that's exactly what makes him the incredible artist that he is. And I also spoke with him briefly after the workshop, and I invited him to the podcast, and he agreed. He told me to message him on Instagram, and he thought the idea was pretty cool. Let's see if it works out. And then he also explained what influence means to him. And for him, that's this freedom, no fixed frame, not being trapped, but instead having this body connection and having the right tension or relaxation at the right moment, this speeding up and slowing down. And also, as I think I mentioned before, for the follower to have their hands on the back the whole time, to seek out information, to take in information, because every move originally comes from the upper body, from the core. And then there's the scene that I will truly never forget. It was an evening social. Melvin was there. He had already gone out onto the terrace because it was so crowded and hot inside, and there were so many women standing in a circle, waiting. Really, every single one wanted to dance with him. And then a guy came along who had come in third at the jack. Melvin rolled his eyes and he didn't want to dance with a man. And you could see and feel it right away. He was the kind of guy who was still happy and just started dancing anyway. He just stood there in his follower position and was happy. And after 2/8, Melvin realized, oh, this guy actually knows what he's doing. Not just some idiot, but someone who can really follow. And then Melvin started to give more, to challenge him more. And the guy accepted it, delivering every time as a follower. And honestly, that's better than 70% of women. And Melvin kept raising the bar and kept going all out. It was incredible. And in the end, Melvin was visibly having fun and had real respect, but you could see how his whole expression changed. That wasn't just a polite smile anymore. It was genuine joy about someone who really challenged him, a true battle partner. And that shows something very important. Good leadership works not because a woman finds the leader attractive or vice versa, but because the body feels trust. And that was a male follower. There was no flirting, no sexual vibe. It was purely about dance quality. And he was able to surrender to it, truly like a real follower. He let the other do whatever he wanted with him. And that was really intense stuff. I feel like he only does that with Gatic sometimes. And why was he able to change Melvin's prejudice and mood? And it's not just about Melvin here. But maybe in general, if you're dancing with someone, how can you change prejudices, which are human and just something people have? And aside from the fact that the guy was confident and genuinely wanted to dance with him, and I think it's simply because the body immediately senses it. They were both clear, they were both present, and everyone knows what they're doing. Everyone knows their role. And that gives a sense of security. And the first 10 seconds decide a lot, maybe even the first 2/8. But that doesn't mean that everything is over after that. Sometimes you can also score points with the second impression, not just the first impression. But in those seconds, in those first 10 seconds, those 2/8, the body doesn't consciously scan, but it scans somehow. It scans, is this person confident? Are they calm or are they hectic? Are they too hard, too soft? Can I finally let go? Can I follow them? Can I lead? And can I open up my heart? And if those first seconds are good, then everything changes. The follower becomes softer, the body opens up, the face relaxes, the smile comes naturally, the movements become larger, the connection is easier. And if those first seconds are bad, then the dance struggle may not necessarily be visible to someone watching, but it is noticeable. The follower doesn't think, I don't trust him, maybe sometimes if it's too obvious. But the body thinks, I have to be careful, I have to stay in control, I can't completely let go. If the frame is insecure, if the timing is nervous, if he wants to show off what he can do right away, then the body goes into protection mode. And as soon as the body goes into protection mode, connection becomes almost impossible. And that's exactly why this scene with Melvin and the male follower was so important to me. Trust in bachata is not romantic, it's biomechanical, and it's not dependent on gender. Trust arises from quality, from a clean frame, good timing, clear energy, calm presence, respectful closeness, and from the ability to truly read the other person's body instead of just running your own program. And the first 2/8 often say more about your level than 10 complicated moves, because in those seconds it simply becomes clear. Are you really present with her or just with yourself? Or are you just focused on yourself and not even aware of your surroundings, not knowing what's happening? You don't know where the music is, you don't know where she is. Do you want to lead or do you want to impress? A very simple dance can be more powerful than a dance with thousands of moves because the body doesn't remember how complicated you were. The body remembers whether it felt safe, alive, and seen. And that's exactly what distinguishes good dancers from people who only know moves, and the first few seconds make the difference. That's true. Sometimes you can turn a situation around through quality and perseverance. Sometimes you have to prove yourself, and when you do, the respect is genuine. Topic number 2, the highlights that don't fit in a photo. And those are the people you have with you. I was there with friends, going to workshops together, eating together, walking, talking. And on Saturday evening, everyone was tired, no real energy left for the party. And I just spent 2 hours chatting with a good buddy about everything and nothing. And that was one of the best highlights. No dancing, no star, just two people talking. And what was also really cool for me was having danced with Raquel and Ritika, definitely a highlight. Normally, I don't ever dance with the artists, but those are exactly the kinds of rare, special moments you just don't get at a regular social dance. It's a completely different quality of movement, a much more sensitive level of responsiveness, a totally different alignment of the frame axis, and a much higher level of technical clarity. Just having that experience with these women, getting to connect with such dancers, shows you again what's possible with the body when someone is truly trained. And dances like that are valuable because they show you there's so much more possible. And that's not in the sense of I'm not good enough, but rather that, for example, the body can become much more refined, the connection can become even more precise, the leading can become calmer, and the dance can become much clearer. And what I thought was cool was I was right in the middle of the hall, walked past her, saw her, and just asked if she wanted to dance because there was no line, no circle forming, just straight up directly. And that's also the best way. Usually, as I said, I don't usually dance with artists, but I just don't feel like standing in line and waiting because during that time I could be dancing. That way I can have lots of really wonderful dances. And what was also interesting to observe, whether I was standing outside or when I danced with them, the artists almost always have a poker face while dancing. And I don't know why that is, but honestly, my highlight was that with Ritika, 3 times I managed to throw her off a little, that I was able to draw out a genuine joy from her. And that made me really happy because I have a few signature moves or special moves that are kind of funny, and she was so surprised and actually smiled and laughed for a moment, and that was really nice. And that I just did some simple moves with someone like her because she's used to being tossed around all the time. Everyone wants to try something out on the artists and show off how great they are. But I just did some simple moves and she still went along with it and, in a way, even enjoyed it. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. And for example, with Raquel, I was unfortunately unlucky because the music was bad, and she even told me that herself. She said, "Wow, the DJ is terrible." And the guy, well, she didn't actually say that part. So she only said, "The DJ is terrible and the music is bad the whole time." And actually, she didn't even want to dance because the guy before me, that's what I saw. Somehow I knew the song only had half a minute left. And with Raquel, there was no one standing there. No one was waiting at all. And the guy, he really wasn't good. He didn't even look at her, and he didn't thank her afterwards. Yeah, but we made the best of it, and it really was a crappy song. I've never heard that song before. And then it wasn't even one of those influencer songs, but it had such a weird beat and was really strange, like really weird, but still it gave off a consistently positive vibe. And that impressed me because I really couldn't connect with the music at all. I really struggled a bit too because I'm someone who tries to dance to the musicality, but that song just left me with question marks. I just couldn't get into the groove. And that impresses me because she also smiled at the guy who danced before me and always gave her best. And that's professionalism, and that's something I wish more people had, even those who aren't artists. But also, watching really strong dancers at socials was a highlight for me. Because seeing how someone builds trust within seconds, how someone brings a smile to another person's face, how a dance suddenly becomes effortless, that's inspiring. That is perhaps one of the greatest benefits of festivals. You don't just learn in workshops, you also learn by observing. You see what works well. Of course, you also see what doesn't work well. You see harsh leading, you see frantic movements, you see showmanship without connection, but you also see calmness, quality, genuine presence. And you can learn from both, from what you want to adopt, and also from what you definitely don't want to adopt. If this episode gave you something, subscribe to Bachata Cafe. Your brain does it automatically anyway if it's good. Trust the impulse. Another highlight, yes, I danced for an hour 3 times with 3 different people. And at festivals, there are the official rules, and then there are the unofficial rules, or are those the real rules? I'll just call them the real rules now. And these rules, they're not written anywhere, but everyone feels them. So, for example, this thing about one dance at festivals, it's often the case that one dance is totally normal, a second one is still okay, like, all right, that was a good dance, I'd like to do it again. And a third dance that basically stands out socially, not because it's forbidden, but because the unwritten logic is that you have to move on. Otherwise, it's basically like you're sexually or romantically interested in the other person and will end up in bed together. And I find that interesting because, on the one hand, bachata is so emotional. You sometimes dance closely, you look at each other, sometimes deeply, and you feel the music together, you share physical closeness. But at the same time, there are these rules of distance. One dance and then move on, don't stay too long, maybe also a bit of FOMO, because you want to dance with everyone, and you also don't want to seem too clingy, not to show too clearly that you might be feeling more, that you might want more. Of course, there are exceptions to this. So if it really flows, if the vibe is right, then you can dance together for an hour. And I've experienced that myself. And then it's not weird, and a shared flow emerges. But basically, you can feel this festival logic. Closeness, yes, but controlled closeness. Intensity, yes, but without appearing needy. Connection, yes, but socially elegantly packaged. You dance, you thank each other, and then you just move on. That has its advantages. This way, you end up dancing with lots of different people, and it keeps things socially open. That also leads to many new encounters. You get to know different personalities, but it also has its downsides. Sometimes real connection gets cut off because of it. You might have just had a really beautiful dance, a wonderful connection, and instead of deepening it, you immediately part ways again, simply because that's what the festival protocol dictates. And that's exactly what makes festivals so psychologically fascinating. They're full of closeness, but also full of distancing games and a lot of uncertainty. I've challenged these unwritten rules every time, deliberately provoking them. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, as I said, it was 3 different women, and each time I spent about an hour with them. I can't say exactly now, it could have been 2 hours or half an hour or an hour and a half. It was easily 20 songs in a row. At some point, I stopped counting because you just get into the flow. And it wasn't just 10 dances with 10 different people. I had that too. But it was about the depth that arises when you have time and when you stop just looking for new moves. When you just stay there in the middle of the dance, was there a sense of closeness? Yes, definitely. Was there an underlying tension? Yes, perhaps there was even a palpable sexual tension between you both. Yes, why not be honest? That's just how it is. But what was in the foreground was the connection and the good dance, and the beauty of being able to endure that closeness without having to immediately turn it into something else. And that's a skill worth developing. And that also depends on how tired you are. After 8 hours of dancing, you should honestly ask yourself, actually, even after 2 or 3, if you're really dancing. I'm not talking about those puppeteers who just stand there and stir the followers like a pot the whole time, but about really dancing yourself so that you honestly ask yourself whether you can still be present for something else. You know what I mean? Let's move on to the third topic, the dance where you lose track of time, because now comes the part that means the most to me personally. I talked about these dances 3 times for an hour each, but there was also one person at the festival with whom I eventually danced because it just clicked, and we danced together throughout the whole festival, often for a very long time. And that's when it clicked, both technically and emotionally. The trust was there, the connection was there, and you just forget the moves. You forget your surroundings, and you have no idea how many songs have played, what time it is, or who is standing next to you. And I did things that I once knew I could do. And I honestly thought I was better than all the stars put together. I could throw them all into one pot. Some of the moves were just crazy. And these moves were created in that very moment, co-creation. She gave an impulse, I picked it up and transformed it. I set something up, she completed it. It was so playful, so harmonious. It was like the leader sets the framework and the follower completes it. It was like yin and yang, like masculine and feminine energy at the highest level. And when both are on the same wavelength, something is created that neither could have done alone. And I can't reproduce these moves either. I was in that moment, and the moment is gone, and that's important. I like to think about it, but without that pull, without that compulsion, without feeling like I have to see this person again. I like to think about it because it was beautiful, because it was real, because I was present in that moment. And that was exactly what I described in episode 8 about real connections versus addiction. I was nourished by this dance, not hungry for more, but I also have to be honest. That doesn't automatically mean romantic or, let's say, sexual or love-based compatibility for a relationship, because a good connection while dancing can be a very good indicator or a very good sign. That's already a good prerequisite. But whether 2 people really fit together in everyday life only becomes clear in everyday life, not on the dance floor, because everyday life is shaped by so many factors: environment, friends, family, work, your experiences, traumas, conditioning, mindset, ability for self-reflection. There are countless things you could list. Whenever you are out there dancing, you often show a version of yourself that you truly can be. But whether you can actually access that version in your daily life is a completely different and more complex matter altogether. By the way, that is exactly what the upcoming episode 9 is all about, so please be sure to tune in right after the conclusion of the special. So, dancing shows the potential, but everyday life decides whether it's really there and whether you can maintain it. And I'm not immune to neurochemical processes either. I felt that again at the festival. Moments when the nervous system reacts, when you let yourself get triggered, when something sets you off. But to consciously notice that and still enjoy it, that's the difference. Everyone longs for closeness, to be seen, for touch, for tenderness, for connection. Me too. I'm no exception. And isn't it truly wonderful when, in that special moment, you can give something meaningful to someone you care about? Of course, it's best when both can give something to each other at the same time. And if I sum up this festival, it wasn't a perfect festival. Definitely not. The microphones were a problem, the bass was a problem, the room layout was a problem, the visibility in the workshops was a problem. The organization often didn't seem well thought out or tidy enough. Definitely not for 3,000 people, but they did make an effort, definitely. The weather wasn't really on our side. The music outside of the socials disrupted the classes, and the after-party organization could be improved. And yes, this premium feeling kept getting broken by the rundown surroundings, by these contrasts. But in terms of value for money, it's almost unbeatable. Albania is still inexpensive. Let's see how long that lasts. And the fairy tale castle by the sea, that's definitely worth it. That's really pretty cool. And the vibe and the people, that was cool. It was open, really nice. And if you're with the right people, then it's awesome anyway. Nothing else matters. And it was truly valuable. Why? Because a festival condenses everything. In just a few days, you experience things that would take you weeks in everyday life. You dance with many people. You observe lots of dynamics. You learn things about your body, about your ego, about status, about attraction, about tiredness, about boundaries, about connection. A festival doesn't just show you how to dance. It reveals the truth of who you really are when you are completely exhausted. Who you are in those moments when you desperately want to be seen by others. Who you are when you find yourself dancing with someone who truly annoys you. Who you are when you face the sting of being rejected. Who you are when you witness someone dancing much better than you. Who you are when you experience a truly magical dance and then must find the strength to let go. And finally, who you are when you come to the deep realization that your tired body actually needs a long break. And that is the real mirror. Not just dance, but your behavior while dancing. Bachata festivals are magical. But they're not just magical, they're chaotic, uncomfortable, physically demanding, socially exciting, sometimes frustrating, sometimes beautiful. My festival in Albania had beach vibes, it had beautiful moments, intense dances, interesting observations, but it also had microphone chaos, missing stages, poor visibility, especially on the dance floor, ego shows, and lack of sleep. And maybe that's exactly the truth about such festivals. They're not perfect, but they're intense. They show you closeness, but also the ego. They offer connection, but also status games. They give you immense energy, and then they take your energy away. And maybe that's exactly why they're so incredibly addictive, because they compress the essence of life. In just a few days, you get music, closeness, beauty, tiredness, longing, rejection, recognition, physical contact, insecurity, euphoria, exhaustion, all at once. And in the end, you go home and ask yourself, was that a vacation? Was that training? Was that a high? Was that something emotional? A roller coaster ride? probably all of it together, and that's exactly why we come back. Not because it was perfect, but because we feel something there that often feels like aliveness in everyday life. If you're going to a festival this year, come by and see if I'm there. Before you keep scrolling, subscribe to Bachata Cafe. Your brain does it automatically anyway when something is good. Trust the impulse? Question for you. What was your most honest moment at a festival? Not your most beautiful dance, but the moment when you learned something about yourself. Write it down in the comments below. I read everything. That was the Bachata Cafe. I'm Ed. See you soon. If you enjoyed this episode, send it to a dancer from your bachata community. Write in the comments what your thoughts are on today's topic. And if you want to learn more about bachata connection and psychology, follow the Bachata Cafe. If you want to be part of the Bachata Cafe community, see you on the dance floor.